So starting with just a little bit of information about us. So we are, for those of you who don't know us very well, at this point, though I do know I saw a bunch of members on the line as well. But for those of you who don't know us as well, we are a recruiting insights and analytics firm that is dedicated to helping heads of university recruiting and heads of talent acquisition in all of your hardest work. So right now we're working with a bit over 250, mostly Fortune 1000 organizations in their recruiting efforts. And the basic way that we do this, our basic work, the way you can think about it is that we every year interview and survey just tens of thousands of candidates, interview and survey hundreds of recruiting leaders and gather data from just countless other sources to serve our members in all of their hardest work. So that's topics like diversity and inclusion, tech talent attraction, virtual engagement, how to overhaul your interview process, how to choose between vendors, insight into what your competitors are doing, and just so much more. So the material we're going to be covering today, everything we're covering today comes from a larger study and guide that we created on transitioning teams to become talent advisors. Now, of course, we won't be able to cover everything in this session, but as I'll note throughout, there are many opportunities to follow up. So with that, why don't we get started with a bit of context on this talent advisor concept. So any exploration of a transition when we're talking about a reason to change from one thing to another should start with an understanding of the challenges of the status quo. So why is it that we're talking about this transition in the first place? Well, the simple reason is that it is very hard to be a recruiter, and that is especially true right now. So what we hear pretty consistently from members is that recruiters often feel like order takers who are expected to fill requisitions as quickly as possible within hiring manager specifications without being given the opportunity to provide strategic, data-driven advice. And this can result in a number of key challenges. The first on the left-hand side there is friction with hiring managers. So what we pretty consistently hear from leaders and from recruiters is that when hiring managers fail to follow best practices, push back on advice, or have unrealistic expectations of recruiters, miscommunications between both parties can occur. So a bit of color that I thought I'd add to this is that any recruiter who is on LinkedIn or is in recruiter forums, recruiter communities, this topic, difficult hiring managers or friction with hiring managers, is a constant source of humor. A lot of LinkedIn influencers, for example, will do pretty funny riffs consistently about frustrations that they have with hiring managers. But what all of that levity doesn't speak to very precisely is that underlying that humor is actually a real structural challenge, because there is no effective recruiting and effective recruiting relationship without cohesion between a hiring manager and a recruiter. That relationship is kind of at the center of a cohesive, effective recruiting operation. So the fact that friction with hiring managers is often just considered a bit of a given is actually a major structural challenge that we've been hearing a lot of recruiting leaders put concerted time towards addressing. So the second result here, limited scope of influence, what we hear from recruiters is that they may feel disengaged when their responsibilities solely revolve around filling requisitions and they are not given enough space to provide strategic guidance that can impact business outcomes. In other words, recruiter engagement is not always a given. We've seen this pretty consistently across the last year with recruiter burnout and recruiter disengagement because of a number of variables, but limited scope of influence, not having control over the whole set of variables that actually matters for accomplishing one's job, that is a primary reason why recruiters tell us they feel disengaged. Finally, this can also result in difficulty predicting and fulfilling needs. So the core job itself. Recruiters are likely to have trouble predicting and fulfilling hiring needs when they're not empowered to be subject matter experts and strategic partners. So every role, you could look at any role in an organization, every role is going to have its challenges. And though we are biased, of course, because our entire purpose and everything that we do is to serve recruiters, to serve all of you and all of your hardest work, we still believe that being a recruiter is an especially challenging job. That said, what is unique about this situation is that, as opposed to other jobs that we've seen, we have seen some alternatives, an alternative in the market that helps address some of these core challenges. And of course, what we're talking about is the talent advisor model. And we've seen a number of members take proactive steps to try to address these by transitioning their teams or establishing their teams as strategic talent advisors to the business. So let's turn to that topic. So what exactly is a talent advisor? Well, we give a loose definition on this slide, which is that a talent advisor is a strategic talent acquisition professional who is 1, forward-thinking, 2, data-driven, and 3, a key partner in influencing hiring and business outcomes. Now, I want to pause on this definition for a second because it might be easy to have your eyes glaze over this definition and just say, okay, that's a lot of good sounding business speak. And that's true. This is a lot of business jargon, but actually we mean each of these points very precisely. And it's best understood through outlining what it is that we are saying a strategic talent advisor is not. So what we're noting here is that a strategic talent advisor is not reactive. They don't base their decisions on intuition, and they don't just follow the leads of hiring managers and of their partners. Rather, they're forward-thinking, they base decisions on data, and they view themselves as a key co-creator in hiring and business outcomes. So what are some of the core responsibilities of talent advisors? Well, for one, they partner with hiring managers to provide guidance on recruitment strategies and tools. Second, they advise internal stakeholders on strategies to attract and retain talent. And third, they hire top talent based on analysis of internal hiring trends and external talent market. The third one is what everyone would consider just a normal part of a recruiter's job, but it's the first two that enable a much more strategic execution of the third. So this is a topic that we will return to at the last slide as well and add a little bit of extra color related to the current economic climate. However, there are some key benefits of evolving into a talent advisor. For one, influencing business outcomes. So talent advisors flex multiple skills such as research, business acumen, and consulting to more directly influence business outcomes as opposed to just the hires that they are working on. Second, in doing so, they often earn a reputation as a subject matter expert. So talent advisors are well informed on internal hiring trends, external labor market trends, and then what that does is it positions them as the person that hiring managers, stakeholders, leaders end up coming to in order to get advice and guidance on the market itself. Finally, what we consistently hear is that the above two benefits actually often result in a third very personal benefit, which is that positioning yourself as a strategic talent advisor can help improve personal growth opportunities. So by moving beyond requisition filling, talent advisors provide additional value that can heighten the ceiling on their career trajectories. So now that we've done a bit of having defined both, now we've done a bit of a definition of both, let's get more granular on the two by contrasting some of the key variables of each of them. So let's look at some of the key differences between recruiters and talent advisors. First, looking at how they relate to business goals. So recruiters typically view themselves as aligned with business goals. They operate behind business goals. They see hiring managers as their customer and fulfill requisitions exactly as requested. Talent advisors, on the other hand, view themselves as co-creators in those business goals. So they shape business goals. Talent advisors see the business as their customer, not just hiring managers, and then build recruitment strategies with a broad focus on what is best for the business. Second, recruiters typically recruit reactively. So recruiters post jobs and fill requisitions only as hiring needs arise, whereas talent advisors build talent pipelines, and that means talent advisors are regularly calibrating with stakeholders and creating talent pipelines based on current and future business needs. Third, recruiters often base their decisions on intuition. And this is because recruiters are people, and a lot of their instincts come in person and one-to-one interactions, and they're able to sense what the right answer is in any situation. But by using this intuition and pre-established best practices, that actually can really help just fill requisition quickly and help hiring managers. However, what we see is that talent advisors rely on a different set of assets. They base their decisions almost exclusively on data. So talent advisors are leveraging internal talent and external market insights to inform recruitment strategies and shape guidance to hiring managers. So a final slide just outlining what it is that we mean by this concept at the highest level. This type of transition, establishing yourself as a talent advisor, it doesn't exactly just happen by accident. No, it requires the development of some skills that may or may not already be in a recruiter or in a recruiting leader's repertoire. So what we pretty consistently hear is that there might be some growth necessary on a personal or individual level in order to occupy that space, in addition to just level setting with stakeholders. So on this slide, what we've done is we've listed out a number of advisory and technical skills and competencies that leaders have told us are required for this transition. So this is much more of a tearaway sheet that we're hoping that you can use for your efforts internally. So I'm not going to go through all of the skills and competencies here, but I'll just do one or two framing notes and then one note on how to use this. So the framing note is that, as you can see, there are two categories of skill and competency that we're listing out here: advisory on the left-hand side and technical on the right-hand side. And I might actually start in the reverse order. So the technical skills are all things that give the recruiter or the recruiting leader the knowledge and the assets that they need in order to be viewed as an intellectual equal and in order to advise the business. So this is research, data analytics, and all of that that are skills and competencies that a recruiter might need. We'll talk a lot more about that over the next couple slides. But then the end purpose is to establish yourself as a strategic partner to the business. And what that means is acting in an advisory capacity. So those are soft skills that are unbelievably crucial, but also can be very challenging to build. So how to use this slide? What we're hoping is that individuals and perhaps even teams can use this as a bit of a personal comparison figure. So if you go through these skills and competencies and just list out the ones that might be that you might already be advanced in, the ones that you might want to invest some time in, then pick out the 2 to 3 that could produce the best results for you, could produce the best advancement for you. Obviously, we're here to help in any way that we can in that upskilling process, but that is typically how we've seen leaders use this tearaway sheet. So with all of that context, let's talk about the how. So this is the start of the second part of our presentation, or the core substance that'll be our outline for the rest of this talk. So what are some steps that we have actually seen recruiters and recruiting leaders take to effectively make this transition? Well, we only have a few minutes today, so we thought we'd focus in on one thing instead of talking about a bunch of things. And it is a specific thing, but it's the single most essential lever that we have seen in making this transition, which is creating strong and equal partnerships with hiring managers. And that's because that partnership with the hiring manager, it's kind of the basic building block of any talent advisor relationship, because a recruiter could have all of the skills, all of the competencies on the previous slide. But if the hiring managers don't see that, and the hiring managers don't recognize that, and then as a result, recognize and acknowledge the recruiter as an intellectual equal, as someone that can advise them, et cetera, then it's all for naught, because then the hiring manager will still expect an order taker. So that will just keep some friction running. So that hiring manager relationship is what we wanted to focus on today. And we've been studying this, studying how members and how leaders have managed this transition. And what we found is that there were 3 key components of establishing that relationship, 3 principles, which of course have more specific actions within each. The first, on the left-hand side there, is access to and knowledge of relevant data. So in order to succeed, talent advisors must have access to reliable and relevant data. They also need to be equipped with the skills to isolate, interpret, and then leverage the most impactful data to drive action within their organizations. Basically, you need to know everything that exists and then have the skills to be able to pull out what matters for an individual leader. What do you do with that? Well, 2 things. First is proactive and advisory-oriented communication. So this is talent advisors proactively approaching hiring managers with issues and opportunities and responding in real time to unrealistic expectations and knowing when to escalate concerns. The scope of their advice is extensive and it is backed by trends and data. So This is not just being reactive to hiring managers, rather is being proactive with what will help us achieve business outcomes. Third is a rigorous pursuit of data-driven decisions. This is just the revolving, consistent decision-making process that relies on information. So talent advisors are just relentless in their pursuit of data-driven decisions. Without fail, they leverage data to inform hiring managers of labor market trends and internal hiring metrics to ensure that recruiting practices are efficient and effective. Really, through all of this, information is key. Information is the thing that's going to enable all of this. And so we're going to spend 3 or 4 slides on this first one, and then 1 slide on each of the applications. So let's jump in and look at the first of these principles, which of course is access to and knowledge of relevant data. So it is just essential, and we hear this from every leader that we talk to about these topics. It is absolutely essential to both have access to key information and to know what to do with it. So from a competencies side, data literacy is just incredibly important. And the reason for that is that talent advisors, what we consistently see is that they seek out and use internal metrics and external market data to support their actions and recommendations as subject matter experts. So to evolve into talent advisors, recruiters have to demonstrate expertise, drawing conclusions from data and distilling them into strategic guidance for stakeholders. So what data should you use? Well, pretty much anything you can, but you can generally divide the most useful kinds of data into 3 categories, and we've listed those out here. The first on the far left-hand side there are candidate decision drivers. So think of this as everything that you can possibly find out about the candidates that you're recruiting so that you can level set stakeholders on the modern candidate, what it is that they're looking for, what will sell them, et cetera. Why is this so important? Well, this is so important because one of the things that we hear pretty consistently from recruiters at the university level, recruiters at the entry level, recruiters at the experience level, et cetera, is that hiring managers have views. They have views on how to recruit candidates, on what will sell them, on what will be interesting, et cetera. And the thing is, sometimes it's useful, but sometimes it's outdated, and sometimes it's uninformed. And instead of doing a debate about which set of anecdotal data has more credence or more weight, the recruiters or the hiring managers, it's much easier to just put concrete data in front of a hiring manager and say, listen, this is what candidates want. This is what the candidate that we're trying to recruit is interested in. So that means here is how we should position our value prop. So what types of variables are we looking for from candidates? Well, high impact sourcing channels, assessment tools, interview content and format, how are they viewing different types of interview content, job priorities, acceptance drivers, what is driving them to actually accept jobs right now. For members on the line, you'll know this well, but we have a product we call our Talent Insights Dashboard. It's available to all of our members that basically allows you to filter down to the precise candidates that you're interested in based on discipline, based on talent type, based on demographics like race and ethnicity or gender, and then look at all of these variables. And the way we see members use this pretty consistently is that when they get a requisition from a hiring manager, before doing the intake meeting, they go and pull the data on that candidate type so that they can be going to the intake meeting with concrete data about what the candidate is looking for, so that if the hiring manager decides to weigh in on aspects of how they should be recruited, if they're aligned, wonderful. If they're not, you can just show them, hey, we actually should do this because here's what the data show. Second category of data are macro market trends. This is basically all of the publicly accessible, labor information and competition information. The reason we've seen leaders use this and train their teams to use this is because macro market trends can help level set stakeholders on the competitiveness of particular jobs. So this is probably a very common experience for folks on the line, but a lot of hiring managers right now are claiming that recruiting is not very competitive, or they're saying there's a bit of an economic downturn, we should just be sweeping up candidates. Turns out that the data does not show, the macro data do not show that recruiting is easy or uncompetitive right now. So we have seen leaders and recruiters use data like the rate of job openings and quits, labor availability, unemployment rates, level of new hires, to level set leaders on how competitive the market is right now. Of course, our tool Talent Scope is a great way to do that. You can just download any of the market data you need by the candidate profiles that you need in order to use that with hiring managers. Finally, a third category category is all of the internal stuff. So the key recruiting metrics and KPIs. So here, it's just incredibly helpful to have a sense of how your numbers compare to other organizations on things like candidate experience, recruiting attrition rates, applications per rec, offer acceptance rate, ratio of external and internal hires, et cetera. And of course, you can use all of our TA stats and KPIs and KPI benchmarking to get a sense of how your numbers compare to other organizations. So if you look at this button in the top right-hand side, there's one other thing I wanted to emphasize on this slide, which is a next steps. You'll see this next steps navigation button. I want to pause on this for a moment because you're going to see this another 3 or so times throughout the presentation. So the whole purpose of this presentation is that we want to arm you with tips for how to transition from a recruiter to a talent advisor. But if there's one thing we've learned about advising recruiters for years and years now, it is that the steps that are required to accomplish a complex goal like that are going to be incredibly custom for each individual recruiter, each individual recruiting leader. So coming out of today's session, we're offering what we're calling next step navigation conversations. The idea with these is that these are free calls for recruiting leaders. So if you're interested in connecting with someone on our team, an expert who can apply some of these concepts specifically to you and do a custom consulting or advisory conversation, we'd be delighted to do that. So whenever you see that button, we'll put in the chat, and I'm guessing we'll see it pop up in just a moment, we'll put in the chat a link that allows you to sign up for a call on a particular topic. So please go ahead and do that if you want to schedule a follow-up on some of these topics. So once again, this is the first opportunity to do a call. So if you want to do a call about how you could leverage some of this data in conversations with your hiring managers and with your leaders, just click on the that link in the chat and we can set up a call. So another couple quick slides on metrics. So as you get started, it's helpful to know what are some of the metrics, TA metrics, that leaders tell us are must knows, ones that they say everyone should have mastery over, even some say you should just be able to, at any given point, pull these out at the top of your head in conversations with stakeholders. So there are 3 categories. We decided to just go comprehensive since we're sending out the slides afterwards, but there are 3 categories of must know TA metrics on this slide. On the far left, our top line recruiting metrics, in the middle, time-based metrics, on the far right, quality of hire metrics. Now, I'm not going to read through the detail of this whole slide, but it's helpful to get it might be helpful to go through afterwards just so you get a sense of what's the full landscape of metrics that TA leaders are using. But just a couple notes on them. Top line recruiting metrics summarize the effectiveness of the recruiting process and candidates' movement in the pipeline. Whereas time-based metrics, these assess the time between 2 points in the hiring process and signal hiring process efficiency. Finally, quality of hire metrics indicate the value new employees bring to a company and aid in the evaluation of the success of the recruiting efforts. But before moving on from this concept, did want to flag utilization rates. So what percentage of TA organizations are actually using each of these metrics as a primary assessor of the success of their TA team? So here, what we've listed on this figure is the percentage of TA teams that are using each of these to assess the overall success of their TA team. Of course, the vast majority use number of hires, but we see a number above 50%, like time to fill, offer acceptance, number of applicants. Then it just goes down steadily until we get to these bottom 6, which I wanted to highlight quickly. These bottom 6, what you'll notice is that these are all of the pipeline quality metrics that point to whether you are securing good talent, converting people to the next stage of the process, running a positive recruitment process, etc. These are exceptionally important metrics for diagnosing problems in the recruiting process. But what we see pretty consistently is only about 1 in 3 companies actually use them. So a final slide here is in this section is what focuses on intake meetings. So intake meetings, we pretty consistently hear might be the Super Bowl of establishing yourself as a trusted advisor. It's like the linchpin, it's the key moment, because it's the moment when you're most able to level set stakeholders, put data to use, establish yourself as an intellectual equal, etc. So of course, The typical topics that are covered in an intake meeting are on the left-hand side here, but what we wanted to flag is the right-hand side, which are the opportunities that we've seen to incorporate data into those intake meetings. So market data is incredibly helpful to level set hiring managers on the competitiveness of the job. Our Talent Finder dashboard, which is another tool that members have access to, basically it's a master sourcing map. So it outlines every single source and conference and way that you can find different segments of talent. Putting that in front of stakeholders can often expand the aperture of where they're willing to look for this talent. Then finally, candidate data, of course, helps level set the value prop strategy for a given role. So let's do a final slide, one slide on each of the other two principles, and then a quick wrap up at the end. So the second principle that we can discuss here, of course, is proactive and advisory-oriented communications. And here, what we've noticed are just some very simple best practices that have led to success for TA leaders and then separately for recruiters. So I'll start with TA leaders on the left-hand side. So what we pretty consistently see to work is empowering recruiters to communicate proactively about hiring approaches and include data in initial conversations, rather than assuming that the principles driving decisions are implicitly understood. Because it has not been historically at many organizations the common practice to introduce data and advise hiring managers in intake meetings, what we've heard TA leaders say is that it actually is really helpful to just re-emphasize it again and again and empower recruiters and tell them this is actually something that we do want you to be leaning into. Second is to educate recruiters or ensure that they are armed with the necessary professional development to be able to take the data that they have access to and construct smart narratives to communicate and advise. If you want us to run a training on that, of course, we can as well. And third is to encourage recruiters to respond in real time to unrealistic expectations from hiring managers and ground explanations in facts, not feeling. So what about for recruiters? Some very precise things. First, to prepare for calls with hiring managers by intentionally laying out the strategies you intend to pursue. Ensure your presentations cover the data behind those decisions. Second is prediction. So here we talk about predicting what types of questions stakeholders will have and proactively pulling the data to speak to those anticipated questions. And then finally is presiding over meetings. So you want to do this confidently so that you're positioned to respond in real time to unrealistic expectations and assume an advisory role, leading hiring managers with data-backed approaches. Here, once again, we have an opportunity for next step navigation. So if you're interested in doing a session specifically about how you can implement some of these best practices, either for TA leaders or for recruiters, just click the link in the chat, let us know. We'd love to do a call to talk through some of this substance. Final slide before one wrap-up slide, and then I'll do a couple minutes if we have it on Q&A. So this is our final principle, which is focused on rigorous pursuit of data-driven decisions. So here, what we've seen leaders do successfully is organize their entire decision-making process around a pretty scientific method. So what we want to see is leaders consistently activating market intelligence, which then helps them make better data-backed decisions. And then they use those, of course, the crucial moment is using that to sell stakeholders on their courses of action using the data. Then later they can measure their outcomes against established KPIs, typically against benchmarking, iterate on internal goals, and of course, lead that back into activating market intelligence. A few keys to data-driven decision-making that we thought we'd emphasize. The first is to question any strategy being pursued that is not actively supported by data. This is one, to make sure that the strategies are correct or as correct as it's possible, but two, because that is the type of activity that builds a huge amount of credibility and buy-in from hiring managers and stakeholders. Second is to regularly assess how hiring manager direction and expectations are being managed. And finally is to stay up to date on internal and external data. So small but important shifts can be acted upon. So once again, if you're interested in doing a session about how you can incorporate the much more rigorous pursuit of data-driven decisions and this process into your own efforts, or if what you'd want us to do is look at your process, the way that you're using data in decision-making, and then benchmark it against our other members, we'd love to do a next steps navigation call with you. So please just click the link in the chat to set up a session. Final slide of substance. So once again, what are the benefits of evolving into a talent advisor? Well, we did 6 slides of implementation over the last 25, 30 minutes or so. this is not by any means a comprehensive run through. We'd love to do additional follow-ups and help you with some of these concepts. We have a lot more data and resources behind these, but it's useful to just lift up once again to think through why it's helpful in the first place to pursue this evolution. These first three on this slide are notes that we have already made, and the final one is a note that I'd like to end with. So of course, one benefit is influencing business outcomes. So what we pretty consistently see are talent advisors flexing multiple skills and consulting to directly influence business outcomes. Second is that often earns them a reputation as a subject matter expert, which of course can help them become more strategic in their role, gain attention from the business. It establishes them as the person the business comes to when they have questions. Finally, this can help from an individual standpoint improve growth opportunities. If you're the person that people rely on for answers, that can increase the ceiling of your career trajectory. Final note here. Right now, we're in the middle of an economic downturn. I know for 9 months now, we've been saying we're about to have a recession. And maybe for another 9 months, we'll be saying that. But I know within the recruiting industry, we have felt some of the effects of that already. And there's something that we've heard from leaders about this transition to establish recruiting teams as talent advisors that feels especially relevant right now, which is that having this talent advisor platform already set up, um, already established, is useful in an economic downturn. And that is because the teams that establish themselves as advisors and intellectual partners to the business in good times are much more likely to have a seat at the table in harder times. The leaders who advised us, who told us about how to establish their teams as talent advisors, in other words, the ones who've done this a bit, are the ones who have felt best over the last 6 months because they've been included in the conversations about how their teams, about what will happen to their teams in an economic downturn. Of course, this is not a fail-safe. Sometimes recruit teams or companies just need to contract a little bit, but if there's an activity that helps in getting a seat at the table, it's becoming a talent advisor in good times. So that is our last slide of substance. I'll do a couple notes here, and then I'll pull up the chat in a second and see if there are a couple questions that we want to answer live. But what I'll note is that we are sharing the recording of today's session with all registrants. Please feel free to go ahead and follow us on LinkedIn if you want to get some more substance like this. We post on stuff like this all the time. But then finally, please do schedule a next steps navigation conversation at the link we've shared in the chat. If you'd like to talk to us more precisely, we'd love to follow up. I'll go ahead and unshare my screen. And since I think we have a couple minutes and I'm still seeing most people on the line, I'll pull up the Q&A and see if there are a couple questions that would be interesting to do live. But if we've answered them thoroughly in the Q&A, then I'll just end the session a couple minutes early. So give me one moment to process these. So I'm seeing one open question that I know one of our team members is responding to right now. But this question states, do you have any suggestions on how as a recruiter we can let management know we do want to move forward to a talent advisory role, but due to large volumes of roles we're expected to fill, it is hard to accomplish our personal goals. Is there a one-on-one I can schedule that focuses on that discussion? So first of all, I'll just note, yes, absolutely. Please do go ahead and schedule a one-on-one with us in the next steps navigation link below. But also what I would note is that this is a pretty common challenge that we're seeing across the industry. So recruiters have had a bit of whiplash across the last year. The requisitions for recruiter were incredibly high at the beginning of the year, and then by the end of the year, recruiting teams were some of the ones that were getting laid off, really unfortunately. So unfortunately, I'm not sure that there is an answer to reducing requisition loads that we've seen, but rather establishing yourself as a talent advisor, doing some of these steps on top of current responsibilities, as hard as that is, might help down the line in terms of having a say in what those requisition loads would be, having a little bit more predictability of roles, et cetera. So that is a bit of a cop-out answer, but we have not seen an extremely easy solution to just advocating for reduced recs so that you can focus on the PD and professional development. All right, let me pull out one or two more. So here's a question. How would you recommend encouraging TA leadership to adopt this model? I find that leadership oftentimes throw out the word talent advisor, but don't know what it looks like, how to execute, or how to train their recruiters. So this is a really good question because this is a concept that is a bit amorphous and has taken on a lot of different meanings in the industry. So one of the reasons that we typically start conversations about talent advisorship with a definition of what it means is to try to address this, to try to create some common language. So one thing I would recommend is taking some of the slides from this presentation and then using them to just establish common language with TA leadership as to what it is we're talking about when we talk about talent advisorship. Then second, I would start small. So it might be hard to convince TA leadership if they're not already bought in to transition to do a huge overhauling process, transitioning the team from recruiters to talent advisors. But if you pick one thing and then focus on that, that can start to make progress. And if there's one thing that we would recommend focusing on, it's the relationship with the hiring manager. And if you need to go even more narrow than that, it would be finding some type of data, whether it's candidate data from us, market data, either from us or from the market, internal data that you can use in every hiring manager interaction just to establish some intellectual equality and some advisorship. So that is where we'd recommend just go narrow, but find one slice of data that you find useful and then use it in every single intake meeting. Okay. We have 2 minutes left and I'm seeing questions are still coming in. Let me see if I can knock out some of these simple ones, but Etta, if you can keep answering these as well, that would be wonderful. Any suggestions of tools I can effectively use to visualize the data I am suggesting? This is a kind of a shameless plug, but we have, if you work with us already, this is an anonymous attendee. So I'll just note, if you work with us already, just let us know because we have all of those tools and visualizations already built. If not, using something as simple as Excel, putting it in Excel and then looking up quick tutorials on how to put those in bar charts or how to put those in trend lines would be very helpful. Just kind of as a side note, happy to help with that. If there's one thing that we're pretty good at, it's data and data visualization. So let us know. Okay, let me see if I can knock out one or two more. If we do not have access to data, what would you suggest as a first step towards becoming an advisor? So I think that one might be a catch-22 of a question. I would actually probably say that getting access to some data might be the first step. We have not seen a model of establishing recruiters as talent advisors that does not include reliance on and leaning on data. So finding data might be a first step. There should be from your ATS some extremely easy data to download. And if you don't have access to that, just asking whoever the ATS administrator is what you might have access to could be a good first step. Once again, I'm not sure if you work with us, but if you do work with us, just reach out to us and we can provide you with data across all of the columns that we're talking about. Okay. Oh, no, we're at time. So I'll stop there. These were some wonderful questions. I know this topic is one we could keep going on forever. Please do let us know if there's anything else we can help with. We love this substance. We love talking about it and presenting on it. So please let us know if we can be helpful. But for right now, thank you very much. We'll have follow-ups coming out soon. And we hope to speak with all of you very soon.